This will be part 2 of my Outlander Blood of My Blood Season 1 Episode 3 review. As always, if you are looking to avoid spoilers from the books or the TV shows, please do keep on scrolling. So after we leave Castle Leathers and the conversation between Davina Porter and Julia about her unborn child, we head back to Castle Leoch and see Ellen confronting Dougal. She calls him out for clearly using her as an excuse to pick a fight with a clan that he has always hated. And now Ellen is the one paying the price for the two men's egos, essentially. And poor Dougal, he tries so hard to play the game, but he's always 1 or 2 steps behind Ellen and Colum. Dougal's argument to Ellen is that at this point in time, Colum is not a laird, and so he's not in a position to make promises on behalf of Clan Mackenzie yet, and especially to enter into an agreement with the Grants. So Ellen starts to figure out what his angle is here, because he's trying to draw attention to the fact that Colum puppeteered this scenario by creating a problem and then being the solution to that problem. So when Ellen asks Dougal that if he were in power, if he would rescind the marriage offer to the Grants, Dougal says that the Grants don't stand to gain anything from the alliance and the marriage between Ellen and Malcolm. So he thinks that they're up to something else here. And he hasn't learned anything yet. He still does not trust them, and he's not seeing the big picture. I think we start to see his facade crack a little bit when Ellen asks him if he truly believes that he will be Laird of Clan Mackenzie. And even though he expresses that he has confidence that his men will back him and the clan will back the men, I think it's faltering. And during this entire conversation, Ellen is able to collect key information about both of the boys and their conversations with each other, because she knows them so well, and so she can kind of lure them both into admitting things without them even realizing it, and they're not registering what is happening. And so when we look back at these conversations at the end of the episode, at the oath-taking ceremony, we can start to see how calculated Ellen was in both of these conversations with her brothers. We also get a little bit of foreshadowing for this character here, Marcus McCrana, who we see watching Ellen walk away, and that is when Dougal observes him, and I think you can see the wheels sort of spinning in his head that maybe now he can use Ellen to get what he wants, just like Colum did. So later that night, when we see him meeting up to talk with Marcus McCrana again, this is the first time that we as viewers start to see around what time period Dougal became involved with the Jacobite cause. And we know how it escalated throughout his life, and by the time we get to the Rising, just how far he would go in order to, raise money for the Jacobite cause right under Colum's nose. And as the two of them are talking, it becomes increasingly more obvious that Ellen is going to be this pawn that now Dougal wants to use in order to further the cause. That is the leverage he's going to try and, use to help him get more support of the men in the clan. If the clansmen were to want a Stuart king, they would have to back Dougal at that point. And the, exchange is that Dougal would promise Ellen to this man here. All of this is very important to keep in mind at the end of the episode, because he does become war chieftain. So this is probably going to come up again. During Dougal's conversation with Marcus McCrana, there's this scene happening in the background, and these two men are debating at the gathering with one another in a historical thing called flighting. And flighting was something that would happen historically when you would engage in a sort of dissing somebody through poetry. So it's almost like a rap battle of sorts. These sorts of flighting moments were meant as a form of entertainment, and the lines of dialogue that are actually exchanged in the show in the background while Dougal is speaking are taken from an actual historical flighting event called the Flighting of Dunbar and Kennedy, I believe is the last name. They have actual lines of dialogue from that recorded flighting event, and if you pay attention, they're actually repeating a lot of the same lines over and over and over again. So they'll say a line, and then Dougal's dialogue will be the prominent dialogue, and then in the background they'll say the line again, but we're cutting in and out of that audio, so your brain doesn't necessarily register that you're hearing the same thing over and over again, but I thought that was kind of clever. And also pretty cool that they took an actual historic event and the dialogue from it and inserted it into this scene here. When we cut back to this scene with Ellen and Mrs. Fitz in her bedchamber, she places her brooch on the table, and we get a close-up shot of that just to kind of remind ourselves that she received that from her father, and he told her when he gave it to her that she would always be a Mackenzie, even though this episode is spent talking about her being married off to 2 men at this point. She's discussing her marriage with Malcolm Grant in this scene here with Mrs. Fitz, and Mrs. Fitz asks if Ellen would take her with her when she gets married, and Ellen does say that she would. Interestingly, though, when she ends up getting married to Brian, Mrs. Fitz is still at Castle Yawk, so I'm really curious if they're going to ever explore why she doesn't take her, or if something happens that makes that not happen. She's putting this, gift that Malcolm sent to her into her hair. It's something that the Grant ladies wear, and you can see here that she's kind of amused by the whole practice of it. Ellen even says at this point, if I get married, because I think she recognizes and even verbalizes that she's very much a chess piece being played in a game, and she knows that there's still moves for her to make before the game is over. And so I think that that's a beautiful metaphor that runs throughout this story, and I think that Ellen as a character navigates a lot of her life in the way that her father described the game of chess. She very much embodies that lesson that she learned from him. And after she says that, Mrs. Fitz says, spoken like a true Mackenzie. And I think, again, that kind of triggers her memory of her father telling her that she will always be a Mackenzie, no matter what. And now that she's faced with this, serious kind of coincidence of her potentially being married off, I think it's important that we recognize as viewers that she's still holding on to that premise and that promise that he made to her. Now, Ellen starts to realize that McKimmy is becoming more and more of a threat to their family. And so without us even realizing it, a lot of the kind of information gathering that she's been doing in the background is so that she can come up with a plan to make sure that he does not get named Laird. So when we're watching this scene of Jocasta and Janet kind of observing him talking to everybody and what his strategy is to gain momentum in his cause, it's interesting in retrospect watching it, knowing that Ellen's the only one that's doing anything about it actively. Janet and Jocasta point out that he is talking to the women so that even if he hasn't won over their husbands yet, when they go home and discuss things with their husbands, they can be kind of the tiebreaker of sorts and try and muster up even more support for him. During this conversation, Ellen is still harboring a lot of anger towards Colum, and Jocasta tells her that Dougal is no better and reveals to her that he's also promised her to one of the Jacobite members. She had found out through her husband, John Cameron, who is very intimate with the Jacobites, is how she phrased it, and that is very true in the Outlander stories too. You learn just how involved she ends up becoming with them because of the men that she was married to. But her husband had heard that Dougal offered Ellen in secret to Macrana, and that's kind of his own alliance that he's forming behind her back. I really have found a lot of my favorite scenes involve Jocasta because I can't pin her down yet. She's clearly jealous of Ellen. She clearly harbors a lot of resentment towards her, but I'm unsure if it's ever going to come to a head. I can't tell if she's a super reactive person or if she's going to just be kind of like constantly simmering under the surface and never actually doing anything with it. I'll be very curious how they play that because it's very subtle, but even in this shot here, when Ellen walks away, she has these kind of like angry facial features that she, bites her, clenches her jaw or shakes her head, and she does them so subtly. It's so smart. And I truly think it's jealousy of the fact that Ellen navigates through life at such a different plane than the rest of her siblings because she is so smart. We see that Brian and Myrta are heading back to Castle Leathers after the gathering, and they return to the kitchen where they catch up with Davina Porter, and we see Julia here too. So she's becoming more involved, I think, in a lot of the conversations that Brian has been having with his mother. And there were so many moments he reminded me of Jamie, like this little smirk here. And Brian becomes very eager to announce that he wants to tell his father everything they learned at the gathering. which I immediately clocked as suspicious. And it makes total sense when we finally get that scene between him and Simon and Myrta, and I'll break that down in part 3.